Hello? This is a speech by Walter Lipman, who was an influential newspaper columnist from 1931 to 1967. This is a speech he is giving in the summer of 1940 to the Harvard class of 1910's 30th reunion. So he's speaking to a bunch of college graduates, grown people who have been out of college for 10 years, who presumably have been somewhat successful because they went to Harvard and are willing to come back for a 30th reunion. And, these are the people who are not going to be fighting in a world war, but whose children will be fighting in a world war. This is 30 years after they've gotten out of college, not 10. It's titled, Walter Lipman Scores His Generational Cohort for Having Taken the Easy Way. I think I am speaking for all of you when I say that we have come here in order that we may pause for a moment in which to fortify our faith and to renew our courage and make strong our spirit. We have come back to Harvard, and when we go away, we shall have realized what ordinary words can scarcely make real to us. We shall realize what it is to be threatened with destruction, what it is that we are called upon to defend. We walk again through the yard, and we shall think of the 3 centuries during which on this ground men have believed in the dignity of the human soul, and how, believing this, they have cherished and labored patiently in the great central tradition of the Western world. This memory will fortify our faith, and we shall say to ourselves that this glory, which is ours, this glory which we have known since our youth, this glory which has given to each of us whatever there is in him that matters at all, we shall say that this glory shall not perish from the earth. We have come back here, along with those we love, to see one another again. And by being together, we shall remember that we are part of a great company. We shall remember that we are not mere individuals isolated in a tempest, but that we are members of a community. That what we have to do, we shall do together with friends beside us. And their friendliness will quiet our anxieties, and ours will quiet theirs. And as they live up to what we expect of them, we shall find the resolution to live up to what they expect of us. And so we shall renew our courage, and we shall find the strength that we need. I am speaking solemnly, because this is a solemn hour in the history of the modern world. No one here today will imagine he can divert himself by forgetting it. But though the world rages and roars about us, we must secure our peace of mind, a quiet place of tranquility and of order and of purpose within our own selves. For it is doubt and uncertainty of purpose and confusion of values which unnerves men. Peace of mind comes to men only when, having faced all the issues clearly and without flinching, they have made their decision and are resolved. For myself, I like to think these days of the words of Washington, which Governor Morris reported. Words spoken in the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia seemed about to fail. Washington, said Morris, was collected within himself. His countenance had more than usual solemnity. His eye was fixed and seemed to look into futurity. It is, said he, too probable that no plan we propose will be adopted. Perhaps another dreadful conflict is to be sustained. If, to please the people, we offer what we ourselves disapprove, how can we afterwards defend our work? Let us raise a standard to which the wise and honest can repair. The event is in the hands of God. Upon the standard, to which the wise and honest generations must now repair, it is written, "You have lived the easy way. Henceforth, you will live the hard way." It is written, "You came into a great heritage made by the insight and the sweat and the blood of inspired and devoted and courageous men. Thoughtlessly, and in utmost self-indulgence, you have all but squandered his inheritance. Now only by the heroic virtues which made this inheritance can you restore it again. It is written, you took the good things for granted. Now you must earn them again. It is written, for every right that you cherish, you have a duty which you must fulfill. For every hope that you entertain, you have a task that you must perform. For every good you wish to preserve, you will have to sacrifice your comfort and your ease. There is nothing for nothing any longer." For 20 years, the free peoples of the Western world took the easy way, ourselves more light-heartedly than any others. That is why we were stricken. That is why the defenses of Western civilization crumbled. That is why we find ourselves today knowing that we here in America may soon be the last stronghold of our civilization. The citadel of law and of liberty, of mercy and of charity, of justice among men, and of love and goodwill. We are defending that citadel. We have made it the center of the ultimate resistance to the evil which is devastating the world. But more than that, more than the center of resistance, we mean to make it the center of the resurrection. The source of the energies by which the men who believe as we do may be liberated, and the lands that are subjugated redeemed, and the world we live in purified and pacified once more. This is the American destiny, and unless we fulfill that destiny, we shall have betrayed our own past, and we shall make our own future meaningless, chaotic, and low. But we shall not resist the evil that has come into the world, nor prepare the resurrection in which we believe, if we continue to take, as we have taken so persistently, the easy way in all things. Let us remind ourselves how in these 20 years we have, at the critical junctures, taken always the road of the least effort, and the method of the cheapest solution and of greatest self-indulgence. In 1917-18, we participated in a war which ended in the victory of the free peoples. It was hard to make a good and magnanimous peace. It was easier to make a bad and unworkable peace. We took the easiest way. Having sacrificed blood and treasure to win the war, having failed to establish quickly and at the first stroke a good and lasting peace, it was too hard. It was too much trouble to keep on trying. We gave up. We took the easy way, the way that required us to do nothing, and we passed resolutions and made pious declarations saying that there was not going to be any more war, that war was henceforth outlawed. Thus we entered the post-war 20s, refusing to organize the peace of the world because it was too much trouble, believing, because that was no trouble at all, that peace would last by declaring that it ought to last. So enchanted were we with our own noble but inexpensive sentiments that, although the world was disorganized and in anarchy, we decided to disarm ourselves and the other democracies. That was also the easy way. It saved money. It saved effort. In this mood, we faced the problems of reconstruction from the other war. It was too much trouble to make a workable settlement of reparations and of war debts. It was easier to let them break down and wreck the finances of the world. We took the easier way. It was too much trouble to work out arrangements for the resumption of trade, because it was too much trouble to deal with the vested interest in the lobbyists and the politicians. It was easier to let the trade of the world be strangled by tariffs, quotas, and exchange controls. And we took the easy way. It was easier to finance an inflationary boom by cheap money than it was to re-establish trade based on the exchange of goods. We indulged ourselves in the inflationary boom and let it run, because it was too much trouble to check it, into a crash that threw about 25 millions here and abroad out of work and destroyed the savings of a large part of the people of all countries. Having got to that, it was too hard to liquidate the inflation. It was easier to cover up the inflation and pretend that it did not exist. So we took the easier way. We maintained the tariffs, we maintained the wage costs and the overhead expenditures of the boom, and thus made it impossible to recover from the crash. The failure of the recovery produced at the foundations of Western civilization a revolutionary discontent. It was easy to be frightened by the discontent, so we were properly frightened. But it was hard to make the effort and the sacrifice to remedy the discontent. And because it was hard, we did not do it. All that we did was to accuse one another of being economic royalists on the one hand, economic lunatics on the other. It was easier to call names than it was to do anything else, and so we called names. Then out of this discontent there was bred, in the heart of Europe and on the edge of Asia, an organized rebellion against the whole heritage of Western civilization. It was easy to disapprove, and we disapproved. But it was hard to organize and prepare the resistance. That would have required money and effort and sacrifice and discipline and courage. We watched the rebellion grow. We heard it threaten the things we believe in. We saw it commit year after year savage crimes. We disliked it all. But we liked better our easygoing ways, our jobs, our profits, and our pleasures. And so we said, it is bad, but it won't last. It is dangerous, but it can't cross the ocean. It is evil, but if we arm ourselves and discipline ourselves and act with other free peoples to contain it and hold it back, we shall be giving up our ease and our comfort. We shall be taking risks, and that is more trouble than we care to take. So we are where we are today. We are where we are because whenever we had a choice to make, we have chosen the alternative that required the least effort to maintain at the moment. There is organized, mechanized evil loose in the world. But what has made possible its victories is the lazy, self-indulgent materialism, the amiable, lackadaisical, footless, confused complacency of the free nations of the world. They have dissipated, like wastrels and drunks, the inheritance of freedom and order that came to them from hard-working, thrifty, faithful, believing, and brave men. The disaster in which we are living is a disaster in the character of men. It is a catastrophe of the soul of a whole generation which had forgotten, had lost, and had renounced the imperative and indispensable virtues of laborious, heroic, and honorable men. To these virtues we shall return in the ordeal through which we are now passing, or all that still remains will be lost, and all that we attempt in order to defend it will be in vain. We shall turn from the soft vices in which a civilization decays. We shall return to the stern virtues by which a civilization is made. We shall do this because, at long last, we know that we must. Because finally we begin to see that the hard way is the only enduring way. You had perhaps hoped, as I did when we came together for our 25th reunion, that tonight we should have reached a point in our lives when we could look forward in a few more years to retiring from active responsibility in the heat of the day, and could look forward to withdrawing to the calm of a cooler evening. You know that is not to be. We have not yet earned our right to rest at ease. When we think of the desperate misery and the awful suffering that has befallen the people of France and of Great Britain and of Austria and Czechoslovakia and Poland and Denmark and Norway and the Netherlands and Belgium, We shall not, I hope, complain or feel sorry for ourselves. So I like to think, in fact, I intend to go away from here thinking, that having remembered the past, we shall not falter. Having seen one another again, we shall not flinch. Hey, that is quite a speech. Quite a speech. It's something to keep in mind here, right? He talks about Western civilization. He talks about, we are the inheritors of the generation before us, and so on. And of course, he's talking in Harvard, 1940 to the 1910 graduates. So this is a bunch of white rich men. And it's interesting to think about that, right? Because he says we should keep the torch going. We are the last bastion and defense of freedom. And yet we know at this exact same time that there's discrimination going on, that the women have just barely gotten the right to vote. We know that America is in the midst of a crisis, right? We are after the Great Depression. They've just gone through the Great Depression, and we are recovering from the Great Depression, but the recovery hasn't quite been completed yet. The only reason that the U.S. really rocketed out of the Great Depression was World War II, and how that increased our production, the need for production, because we had to sell a bunch of things to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world wasn't building things, and America was at peace and wasn't being bombed and wasn't really under threat of being bombed, and so on and so on. It was the wartime economy that ended the Great Depression. Even though we were coming out of it and we had done a lot, we had changed our, Roosevelt's New Deal had a wonderful effect, but not a complete effect. And he's thinking, America at this point is thinking, okay, we're coming out of the Great Depression, the world is getting better, and just as it gets better, just as jobs reappear, just as we recover and repair ourselves, across the ocean we hear rumors, we hear stories of a movement, of a people, of a person, of hatred and despair and conquering war, which is spreading across the seas. And are we safe here? Are we going to be at peace, or are we going to enter into this war again? And we know this war is arising because of what we have done or failed to do. Because in World War I, there was, an attempt by Wilson to end up with the League of Nations and come together to avoid war, but then the U.S. decided not to sign on to that. And then as part of World War I, there were these huge reparations put on Germany, and they had to repay these gigantic war debts because they were held to be at fault for the war. And this wrecked their economy for a generation, which led directly to the rise of Hitler, because he could blame the Jews for their problems, because he said, I can take you out of this malaise, because the Weimar Republic was not particularly strong economically or politically. Because we replaced the Kaiser, but we weren't there to uphold democracy. We weren't there to assist those who we just destroyed and knocked down. And it's all coming back to us, because, if we don't help the downtrodden, then the downtrodden will rise. And they may not rise in a way which is favorable. They may not rise in a way which is good. They may not rise in a way which upholds the virtues and values that we hold dear. They may rise in a very fascist, murderous, conquering way. This has been the story of civilization for a very long time. Civilization arises, then barbarism comes in from the steppes and knocks it down. Civilization, then barbarism. Civilization, then barbarism. And I say barbarism just to mean not that the barbarians are less civilized than the civilized groups, but the barbarians are wilder, right? They are more movable. They are not so tied down to an idea of the way the world is and should be. No, they declare this is what we want to happen, and so let us do that. Then they become the new people, and their descendants live in ease. Their descendants rule over a group of people and grow into a civilization. They concern themselves with different things. Instead of martial war, it's art and beauty and laws. But then we have this tendency, right, to focus now on our quality of life. But by doing so, we weaken the defenses. And if there is no enemy, if we are, for example, a civilization existing on the Isle of Crete, if we are a civilization existing in the island of Japan, on the islands of Japan, and invading us is difficult, we do not have to defend ourselves every day against some horde somewhere, then you can, to a great extent, take your ease, because the only enemy you're going to find is the one within yourself. The only enemy you're going to find is nature. But eventually, of course, the barbarians learn how to build boats. And now they're at your doorstep, and you better do something. You better learn. And we can see this happening exactly with Japan, right? During the same time period we're talking about. Japan is very focused on itself. It is a closed nation, and it is more or less at peace. And then the white ships arrive, and then guns arrive, and then the shogunate, the fall of the various pieces which held it together. The rise of Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa after him, and so on. And eventually the system is controlled by the barbarians, right? The ones who learned from the barbarians, the generals, the warmongers who say, we must now defend ourselves against the West. And so we go marauding. We go attacking. We take over Korea and then Manchuria. We beat Russia. Now we're going to attack the rest of China and the European colonies and the United States. Because what's the rhetoric there, right? What's the rhetoric in Germany? We are the best. We are the strongest. We deserve it. They did bad things to us. They humiliated us, and so we must make our revenge. And we always have the option, right, of doing exactly what Churchill and the others did during the breakup of Poland, peace for our time. I think it was Poland. Maybe it was Czechoslovakia. Maybe it was Austria. I should know that. I should know this, the timeline of World War II a little more clearly. Right, but that claim, peace in our times, let us take the easy way out. Let us not fight, because if we give in now, then they will see the way. and not fight and not act as barbarians, but they will. And that's what he's talking about. He's like, we sit here and we hear rumblings from the interior. We hear of stories of events on college campuses. We hear of flotillas going into the Mediterranean. We hear of praise for a messianic figure. We hear of climate change happening. We hear of rising energy prices and a troublesome economy, and we hear of housing issues. We hear of economic issues. We hear of production issues. We hear of a war happening halfway across the world, which we don't think involves us. And maybe it doesn't, but what do, right? We take the easy way out. We say we don't need to change. We need to remain the same. We don't need to come up with new ideas. We can regress to the old. We don't need to build houses. We can fix the problem in some other way. We don't need to deal with a slowing growth in the economy. That will take care of itself. We don't need to deal with dangerous political movements. They can't possibly win an election, right? Or if they don't win an election, that they can't possibly form a useful defense against our movement, so that they can't possibly stand in the way of civilization and of progress. They can't possibly think that they will be able to infect our children with their horrid ideas, because they're just barbarians. That's just the foolish young. That's just the ill-educated rednecks. And each side, each version thinks this of the other, that they represent civilization. But civilization, for all its benefits, has weaknesses as well, right? And it's interesting to me reading this, because when I think of, how have we taken the easy way? What I think of is precisely, if I've heard stories of problems we've had, right? I've heard stories about the rising cost of housing for 20 years. I've heard stories about Israel and Palestine for 20 years. I've heard stories about the danger of Russia for 15 years. I've heard stories about rising China for 15 years. I've heard stories about the United States of America and its problems with, variously transgenderism or racism or fascism or NIMBYism or whatnot, right? And I think when you get to a certain age and you realize that we've been hearing the same troubles, or hearing about the same troubles for years and years and years, and they never seem to be fixed. They always seem to be pushed on to, we'll do it next year, we'll do it next year. We'll do it when we control both houses. We'll do it when we win the presidency. We'll do it when we can compromise our way to an answer. We'll do it when the generation who holds us back dies out. We'll do it, piece by piece, bit by bit. And I think that's a valid way to go about things, right? Piece by piece, bit by bit, recognizing something has to change before you can begin. But it is also easy. It is very easy to say, I took one step today. I don't need to take two. Two is too hard. I can wait for something to change in our generational balance, or Or I can wait for the problem of housing to become so acute that we must say something about it. Or I can wait until we receive yet more information about climate change before doing anything about it, because it may not be real. And this is, to me, an easy way out. When you hear about a problem, what do you do about it? And easy way out can be do nothing, right? Easy way out can be, I am afraid, I am worried, I understand this is a problem, I'll talk about it, I'll talk to a camera about what I hear and see, but what do I actually do, right? How do I vote? Who do I talk to change things? How do I challenge my own views? How do I ensure that I am working towards something? And in 30 years from now, right? Will I be able to say I did something, or will I simply be another peon, a fly on the wall during whatever events happen? And there will be great events. There always are. Look at any decade in the last 100 years, and something happened which changed the future, even if we didn't quite understand what was happening, even if it seemed small. World War I, the Great Depression, the lead up to fascism. You had World War II. Then you had the 50s and the repair and the rising issue of, this Soviet versus the communism versus capitalism outlook, and America controlling the world order. Then there was it was a Korean War during that time too. Then you run into the 60s, the 70s, Vietnam, all the social changes. You run into the 80s, where it seems like a little nothing happened, but you had like video games start during the 80s. You had cell phones come out, and look how those change our world today. You had the 90s, the fall of the Soviet Union, which is a momentous occasion all by itself. You had, I think in the 80s, in Japan, you had the boom years, and then in the 90s, the boom years fell down. In the 2000s, you had China really rising into its own for the first time in several centuries again. You had the war on terror, all the Middle Eastern issues and problems, which led to, a great many issues and problems we have today, right? Why is there so much? Why is illegal immigration an issue in Europe? Because of all the wars in the Middle East and in North Africa. If the Middle East was peaceful, if North Africa was economically growing fast enough, if there wasn't war and terror and death, casting a pall across the earth, then would we have run into the wars and troubles of today, the conflicts you hear about? If we had done something more, if we had done something else, if we had just tried something, would we have? What would have happened, right? As I think I started this 30 or so days ago to mark on the 30-year reunion he's talking about, by reading a book about a Secretary of Defense during 9/11, and then hearing about 9/11, our entry into Afghanistan and Iraq as America. And I was young during that time. I was in school. I barely remember it. Just remember hearing about it, and hearing about it, and hearing about it, and a decade later, still hearing about it. And a question arises in my mind. Were we doing the hard work of being there and being active and sacrificing blood and death and pain and all that and being blown up? And was that taking the easy path and the hard path, right? Is it the hard path because we sent money and people there and we tried to keep terrorism going downwards? We tried to keep the peace. We tried to make countries stronger. Or was it taking the easy path because we had got there without really a plan? We got in, we put people in charge, and then we thought we could just rest on our laurels. Or we thought just one more year, another 1,000 dead, another $100 billion spent on this, and we'll work it out. That's all we need, just another push. And is that the easy way because we couldn't come up with anything else, because we just repeated ourselves doing the same thing in the same way? Right? Like, what is the easy or the hard way? It's not only doing the work, because you look at any group and we do the work. You look at the issues we have with not building enough housing, and there's always somebody doing the work, pushing for more housing, or saying we don't need more housing, or saying that housing needs to be safe, or saying that we need to reduce environmental issues. There's all this talk and wonderment and movement, but it seems like the story is also always the same. It seems like I hear we should build more housing, and we should make it easier for housing, or the housing prices are too high, so we need to institute rent control. Or I know we should build housing, we shouldn't build housing here, right? Or we're building housing, but it turns out that we have very strict environmental laws, and the effect of those is that housing isn't being built at all. Or where we have zoning, and the zoning is meant to make the city how we like it, have sprawling suburbs, have a downtown, meant so that we don't have super high buildings in places where we think they ought not to be. And yet, shouldn't we also review the zoning? Shouldn't we ask, is it doing the work that we thought it would do? Is it being effective when we thought it would do? And the same issue can happen with our laws, with our discussions over any issue from gender to race to free speech to gun violence. The easy way is not only refusing to do the work and refusing to listen and saying, that's troublesome, but not my problem that there's school shootings. It can also be when we simply repeat the old ideas. Right? He talks about let me see. Right. It was too much trouble to make a workable settlement of reparations and of war debts. It was easier to let them break down and wreck the finances of the world. I've been hearing about the U.S. debt crisis for literally 20 years. About how we're in debt as a nation, and the debt is growing, and it's going to become a problem one of these days. When is that day? When will that day arrive? Did we take the easier way? I can't help but feel that we have taken the easier way of we keep spending more and more, but we keep lowering taxes and taking on more debt, and we know 100% we know that is not sustainable. Or at least that's what I hear, that it's not sustainable and hasn't been, and it won't ever be sustainable. That my generation, when we get to our 60s, will not be as rich. Will suffer from economic issues. We'll be paying taxes to restore a debt. that we were not responsible for voting to take over, or we didn't vote in order to stop it or to move it. Okay? And the same can happen with almost any problem. It was too much trouble to work out arrangements for the resumption of trade because it was too much trouble to deal with the vested interests and the lobbyists and the politicians. It was easier to let the trade of the world be strangled by tariffs, quotas, and exchange controls, and we took the easy way. It's instead of working out agreements which repair or explain some of the damage done over the last 40 years when production in the U.S. is falling. Because we've opened the borders of trade. We've reduced tariffs for a very long time. And that has very good effects worldwide, very good effects, but locally can cause problems and issues. And now those problems and issues have very obviously arisen to become a major issue in our political equation. The workings the last 30 or 40 years have had results. And I've heard about, the decline of the coal towns, the decline of Midwest, of the middle America, the problems and the crime and the drug issues and on and on and on. I hear about them, and we are engaged in trying to fix them. We're engaged in trying to do something about them, but at the same time, it seems we are not engaged in trying to fix them or doing something about them. We accept that these are an issue that we have to deal with, but we don't ask, why does this issue arise in the first place? And so we take an easy way, right? I mean, we can see this in the United States today. Having blanket tariffs put on countries is the easy way. It's to think that we can negotiate from a position of strength and we don't have to go through complicated discussions. We don't have to consider what the other person thinks or feels. We don't have to think about the long-term problems this can cause. No. We want an answer today. We want to be shown doing something. The U.S. right now is having a government shutdown, and this has happened multiple times, right? It's easier to let the government shut down. And you can say it's the Republicans' fault, the Democrats' fault, but of course it's not. It's both of them. It's everybody. It's every person is to blame for what's going on in America today. None of us are guilty. All of us vote, or we have a political party we're a part of, or we represent a folk, and some of us may be willing to put in the hard work. Some of us may not. Some of us may think we're doing the hard work, but really we're just standing still, repeating the same ideas without being willing to change. This is a issue. To speak of present politics, right? I've heard for the last 15 years, right? Well, the Republicans are the anti-party. They're against it, against. They don't want the Democrats to win in any way. And so they'll vote against their own interests or the interests of their own people so that the Democrats don't get a win. And I've heard the Democrats, on the other hand, are trying to change the culture of the states, or trying to push, let's say, renewable energy, or trying to push gender equality. And these are good goals, but obviously the message has been lost somewhere. Obviously the way it's being gone about is not quite working. And when Lipman here is talking to a class, he's not talking to one individual person, he's talking to the entire class. He's saying that we have taken the easy way. We have failed. We have not been willing to change how we are or how we act or how we believe. And so the future is fated for us. You know, we walk into our own ruin well aware of what we're walking into, but covering our eyes and denying it. No, he says, we took the easy way. It was easier to finance an inflationary boom by cheap money than it was to reestablish trade based upon the exchange of goods. We indulged ourselves in the inflationary boom and let it run because it was too much trouble to check it. And, debt is another way of saying this problem. But this is also a worry we have about the stock market today with the AI boom and how it's going up and up and up. And are we doing good or bad? Is it going up too fast? Is there not enough behind it? Is AI going to create a whole new world and it's a winner-take-all situation? These are questions to ask. Are we taking the easy way or the hard way? By simply allowing the economics of today to happen. We talk about taxes and, I'm reading a book on taxes, which I'll cover next. And part of what the book is talking about is we should just have a flat tax of like 10% or something. And well, yeah, that makes sense. And it's easy to understand. It's simple to understand. 10% tax and everything. And done, 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 done. But that doesn't mean it's the best choice. It just means it's the simple one. It's the understandable one. And we can say this about almost anything, right? We can say this about the people who voted for a president or a party, the people who are against anything from guns to electric cars. That there is an easy answer, there's a simple answer to give in response to them. And yet, if we give this answer and it doesn't work, what do we do next? We repeat ourselves. Get the same arguments and the same arguments and the same arguments. And we hope that one day the people we are arguing against simply understand what we're going on about. Or they get old and die, and a new generation arises. Or the effects of anything from climate change to gun control to not taking care of countries which are having political problems ends up resulting in. And he says, having got to that, it was too hard to liquidate the inflation. It was easier to cover up the inflation and pretend that it did not exist. So we took the easier way. We maintained the tariffs, we maintained the wage costs, and the overhead expenditures of the boom, and thus made it impossible to recover from the crash. If we simply repeat the old arguments again and again and again without understanding what's happening, if we simply hold up the old laws and the old ways of doing things, then eventually the flaws in those old ways come to have an outsized effect. No action is perfect. No constitution, no country, no movement, no party, no person, no law is perfect. And an idea or an action may be correct for the moment, may be correct for a decade. But when you extend that activity to another decade and another one and another one, to a different world, different technology, and different problems, then the flaws of the old way of acting may reveal themselves. Good is good enough, but it's not great. It says, the failure of the recovery produced the foundations of Western civilization, a revolutionary discontent. It was easy to be frightened by the discontent. So we were properly frightened. But it was hard to make the effort and the sacrifice to remedy that discontent, and because it was hard, we did not do it. If you're on the left, then the discontent is about economic problems. The discontent is about changing culture. If you're on the right, then the discontent is about a changing method of production, or about a threatening of the old culture and the old power structures, the old definitions of race, for example. It's easy to be frightened by the discontent. It's easy to stand as a Democrat or a Republican, as an independent, and say, oh my gosh, this is such a problem. What are we going to do? I guess we'll do the same thing we've been doing. Except part of the reason, not the entire reason, but part of the reason that this discontent arises is because you've been doing the same things you've always been doing. Right? Like Donald Trump is a sign of discontent, not the cause of discontent with the way the power structures in the United States have been running the place. The people we voted on, the ideas we upheld. And I don't think it's going to be the correct answer. I think it's a very dangerous answer, very dangerous discontent. But what happened? We saw this in the latest election. Trump runs for office and says, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And then you had Harris running for office basically saying, the message was, we'll change a few little things, but mostly it's business is the same. If you like the way the world is going, vote for me. But the very fact that the election is close, the very fact that Harris camp thinks they could lose, is an indication that the way things have been running, the way the world has resulted in, is not something people are looking forward to. The feeling is that something is wrong, so something must change. And we may choose the barbarian. We may choose the wild power. We may choose as a nation to destroy ourselves in action. But is that better? Is it better to destroy yourself through action or inaction? I suppose is the question as to how we should be, or how we should look at the problems of today. Because I tend to be a little more leftish, right? And I can look on the news in my feed, my internet feed, and I'm like, oh yeah, the rising fascist ideas, rising troubles here, rising anti this and that, lowering taxes on the rich, and I'm going, this is probably not going to end well. This is probably not a wonderful road to be on. And it is easy, I think, to say, oh no, woe is us, the world is falling apart. oh no, how terrible these people are, or no, how evil these people are, and oh no, these people, they want to destroy the United States, and in a way they do, right? They want to destroy the system that has existed. But why? I don't think that we have really understood this. I think that for certain segments of the population, it's easy to understand, right? If you are young and radical and left in college, then you want to reduce racism, want to reduce violence, you want to reduce hatred against transgenderism, you want to stop supporting countries that are oppressing other people. You want to not hear about the same old problems in the same old way. You want new problems. You're like, look, we've been going on about this for years and years and years, and let's make a better world. And I think on the right, you may look at that and you go, the world today is not as good as it was 30 years ago. And it's because of these people doing all these things. It's because of these people causing all the cultural problems, or it's because of these people, taking advantage of the economic problems, or it's because of these people being incompetent, or because of these people, who they hate my history. They hate that I have guns, and that sort of thing. But to simply stand there and on one side or the other say that things are fine is troublesome. To say that we have won in certain ways, we have done things, and yet this has a reaction. What was it? There was a saying that someone had said when they passed Obamacare, that we passed Obamacare and that will lose our party. I think it was Democrats. Yeah, lose the Democrats the next 10 years of elections. We will have lost the Senate for a generation by passing Obamacare, but it was worth it. And that is, I think, the hard choice to make. That is not taking the easy path. That is saying that we must do something to change the world. So I view that as a good idea, a good thing to have done. And there was a cost. And if you accept the cost of your actions and still choose to do your actions anyway, then, kudos to you. I think that's a great example. Conversely, if you take an action and you refuse to accept the cost of that action, if you say my actions are perfect, my actions are never wrong, if you say that my actions have no bad effects, then that is false. All actions have bad effects to somebody in some way, to some system. And the system you may have a bad effect upon might not be the greatest system, might not be a good system, but it has an effect. And how do we take that into account? How do we understand that once we pass civil rights legislation, then there is a different world after that. And there is also a reaction to that. And so we've done good things. We've changed the world for the better. And what happens now, 30, 40, 50, 60 years? Obama was black, right? He's black. He's still alive. Yeah, he's black. And there are people who didn't vote for him because he's black. There are people who disliked him and his policies and his party and all his ideas simply because of his race. I think these are a minority of people, but they exist. And, denying their existence will not solve the problem they represent. There are issues today where people, you push, transgender legislation, and there's a pushback against that. And it's one thing to stand there and say, transgender legislation or gender for women or gender for kids or this or that or whatnot is good or it's bad. But it's entirely another activity to step back and say, what are the effects? Not thinking about, moral issues here, but we passed a law, we did a thing, we changed a agreement, and that has an effect. How do we deal with the effect? Because we're in a different world now. And the easy path is pretending it's all the same, is pretending that the old way of doing things never needs to change, never needs to be challenged, or pretending that the old way of things is still happening, still works. So, I think we live in an interesting world, okay? So he says here, if we arm ourselves and discipline ourselves and act with other free peoples to contain it and hold it back, we shall be giving up our ease and our comfort. We shall be taking risks, and that is more trouble than we care to take. So perhaps there is in this a guideline. What is the harder way? The one where we are not comfortable with it. We're not comfortable with thinking about it or changing it or challenging it. It is the way where we have to not take our ease, where we can't simply sit back and allow a change to happen. It's the one where we have to take risks, and it might not work. And that's a lot of trouble. That's a lot of problems. The housing laws and the zoning laws we've had for the last 30 years, they work. Why do we need to change them? Well, they are part of the reason we have the problems we have today. And they may have existed to solve the problems of 60 years ago. They may have done that. But as a result, there's a new difference that happens. And it's troublesome to constantly review your thoughts. It's troublesome to read your old diaries or to watch your old videos and to ask yourself, was I right? Was I wrong? Because have things changed? Was there a result to that? Because we can get so wrapped up in good and bad. We can get wrapped up in thinking, well, this is how things ought to be, or this is how things are, and we don't need to question it. When we do need to question it. We need to take risks. We need to be uncomfortable. And if we simply refuse to change, and the world will change with us. The barbarians will come down from the steppes, or they'll rise up within our own cities. Because civilization became unbalanced and forgot how it got here in the first place. No, he says, there is organized, mechanized evil loose in the world, but what has made it possible its victories is the lazy, self-indulgent materialism, the amiable, lackadaisical, footless, confused complacency of the free nations of the world. It's all fine. There's no problems. Don't worry about the news. Don't worry about the troubles. Don't worry about the guns. Don't worry about the violence. Don't worry about the Sahel. Don't worry about climate change. I know you hear about this news, but it's not real. It's not strong. It doesn't change anything. Don't worry about the news that the other party is going to win the election. Don't worry about the quote you had from a world leader today about I was going to take revenge on this person, or he's going to destroy that person. Don't worry about all the stories you hear from inside, a country about how there's problems and troubles. Just shut up, be quiet, Take it easy. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to change anything. Everything's fine. But things are never fine. And I think part of the reason this happens is it has to do with maintenance. When we buy something, when we build something, we often think, oh, the road cost this much. No, the building cost this much. The railroad down from, San Francisco to LA costs this much. The new Capitol building costs this much. The new tariff costs this much. But there are ongoing costs. There are ongoing effects. Now that we've built the bridge, we have to maintain the bridge. Now that we have built the system, the economic system the world runs on, we have to maintain it. And now that we have a constitution that creates a country, we have to maintain that constitution. We have to constantly maintain. And this doesn't mean that we have to be on guard. It doesn't mean that there are enemies out to get us. It just means that there is always movement in the world. And if you refuse to move, the world will make you move. The world will move around you. There's always something pushing down on civilization. There's always something saying that you don't need to do anything else. You don't need to change. You don't need to challenge. You don't need to question, but you do. That the cost of freedom is not only the willingness to, stand up for your rights, but it is the constant need to actually stand up for your rights. So the inheritance of freedom, he says, the inheritance of freedom and order that came to them from hard-working, thrifty, faithful, believing, and brave men. The imperative and indispensable virtues of laborious, heroic, and honorable men. So one of the crises of faith we have in these days is that we do not look with happiness upon the past. We look back and it is a past of America filled with slavery, homelessness, racism, hatred. And it is a past of the world filled with colonialism and unfairness and destructive activities, from poisoning the ground to burning the oil to exploding nuclear bombs. And every good person you hear about is either mistaken, a la Martin Luther King, that claim right there, or was actually bad, like, George Washington had slaves, so he was bad. The personhood of Abraham Lincoln, he held the nation together, but he was also very accepting of slavery. The failure that we had a slave war, and then there was a failure of Reconstruction. We had a giant percentage of the world's production, and then we let it go. The U.S. is on top of the world, and then it turns out we are not ruling the world. The U.S., the movement westward, but we also slaughtered and killed and stole. And these are true. These are things to remember, but where are the stories of today? Who are the people that we can say, I want to be like that? Who are the people who lived through events where we can say, this is exactly like that situation or like that event? I can read of political issues in the Roman Republic which echo almost exactly issues we have today. From the power of individual people to fanaticism to economic issues. And, he says, the virtues of laborious, heroic, and honorable men, but there are no longer laborious, heroic, and honorable men. We may have once have looked back upon our ancestors, but now we stand and we can also say, they led us to today. We can talk about, the people who are in charge, and why are you still in Congress at 87? Let go. But why would you let go when you're trying to be active and strong? You're trying to protect the world. You're trying to save it. You're trying to still uphold the virtues and values you hold on to. Of course you're going to stay in power. And of course we keep voting you in. Of course, we hear somebody say that I'm all against this power, or I'm all for this idea. And it is somewhat rare to know that, your representative or your governor is actually for something, is actually willing to stand there and do hard talks. Instead, we have the middleman. Instead, we have the nobody. Instead, we have the everyday person who wants to be recognizable to the audience, wants to be understandable, wants to be trusted. And there is a place for that. There's good reason for it. But then you hear and you go, that's also sort of a movement that doesn't want to change anything. When you look at the world and you say, we're going to vote for the nice person, we're going to vote for the good person, those are not always synonymous. Because the laborious, heroic, and honorable men could also be monsters. Can also be terrible and filled with righteous fury, or have vices equal to their virtues. There's no perfect person, but perhaps we can be a little louder, a little less soft civilization, a little more wild barbarism. Because that's the cost of maintaining a civilization, that the barbarians arise to challenge the civilization. And if the barbarians aren't us, if we are not willing to ask the hard questions, if we are not willing to upset our own order, then someone else will. And they may not love what we love. They may not uphold the same values we do. They may not be willing to maintain the Constitution and the ideals of our nation. Because why would they? It's we who have to decide to do that. And that means very difficult discussions. That means very costly actions, very risky actions sometimes, because we might lose. And it's so easy to take the long, slow, steady path. It's so easy to think we have a system which will take care of it. We have a rule of law and an order which will damp down any real trouble. The world, our day-to-day life is not going to change no matter what happens, no matter who's in charge, no matter what noise goes on about, no matter all the problems I hear about in the news. There's always problems in the news. There's always somebody whining about how, society isn't on my side. But I think at least when you hear the same whining, when you hear the same stories and movements for years and decades, that is a sign of the need for remembering the past and not flinching at carrying the weight of it. Not flinching at dragging the past, screaming and whining into the future. He says, "You had perhaps hoped, as I did when we came together for our 25th reunion, that tonight we should have reached a point in our lives when we could look forward in a few more years to retiring from active responsibility in the heat of the day, and we can look forward to withdrawing to the calm of a cooler evening. You know that is not to be. You have not yet earned our right to rest at ease." And for me personally, this is the story of my life, right? This is the story of my generation, because I was born, with the fall of the Soviet Union. I was born with the entry into a new world. I grew up with 9/11 and the War on Terror. And in each of those cases, I think the United States of America thought it could rest on its laurels. Soviet Union has fallen. This is the end of history. We just have to maintain what's been going on. We don't need to change anything. We don't need to challenge anything, and it'll all work out. We had 9/11, and we go in and, hey, we went in, we beat the terrorists, we created the modern states of Afghanistan and Iraq, and all we got to do is give them a little support and the world will work out. But of course it didn't. New challenges rise, new problems happen, and we cannot at any point rest on our laurels. In the United States, I think there was this general sense that the establishment could rest on its laurels without changing. And then you had barbarism rise up from within. And not to say this is bad barbarism by itself, but it is an anti-movement. That says we have to now maintain what we have created. We can't rest at ease. Whether, blue or red, right or left. If we don't move the world, someone else will.